I think it's important to stress that the ceasefire in Israel and Gaza is not peace. It's a political settlement, or at least it's a step towards a political settlement. It isn't a political settlement at all. The text of the US brokered arrangement is explicit. Within 72 hours of Israel's acceptance, all hostages alive and deceased must be returned. Only then do the subsequent exchanges and stabilization measures flow. That clock and the sequencing matter. And on Wednesday, the 29th, 2 days ago, Israel launched heavy strikes across Gaza after an Israeli reservist was killed near Rafah, and after Israel accused Hamas of violating the terms on the return of the remains. At least 100 Palestinians were killed, including many children. By the following day, Israel said it had restored the ceasefire, but warned it would hit again if attacked. Yesterday, 2 bodies were transferred via the Red Cross to Israeli authorities and identified as Amiram Cooper, an 84-year-old man, and Sahar Baruch, a 25-year-old man. 11 deceased hostages remain, therefore, in Gaza. This was the first handover in 9 days and came after a separate incident in which Israel said Hamas staged the discovery of human remains that were not among the 13 still unreturned, prompting a rare public rebuke from the ICRC. These are not small breaches. They go to the core obligation that sustains the truce. Rumours that the Prime Minister might track to the centre evaporated, therefore, this week. 2 domestic dynamics pushed him back toward the settler right partners. The West Bank policy, which is the coalition glue, continues, really, while Washington gropes towards an international stabilization force for Gaza's day after. Ministers around Bezalel Smotrich continue to drive outpost approvals and annexation adjacent measures in the West Bank. And that is how this coalition signals momentum to its base when Gaza is under a truce. It also hardens Palestinian mistrust and makes centrist Israeli cooperation with Netanyahu still less likely. Netanyahu and the IDF chief both pledged publicly this week that Hamas will be disarmed and Gaza demilitarized by foreign troops, if possible by Israel if not. That framing reassures his right flank that the truce is tactical, not strategic. It simultaneously alienates centrists who see endless force without an attainable political end state. The result is a paradox. The Prime Minister too toxic for many centre factions, yet without a plainly viable successor ready to assemble a majority while the war file is still open. That political stalemate bleeds into military signalling. At the same time, what is each side doing? Hamas is pocketing the humanitarian pause, testing the boundaries on returns of remains, blaming access constraints for delay. The ICRC's statement makes clear that any staging of recoveries is unacceptable. If Hamas cannot locate bodies because of rubble and tunnel collapses, it needs to document genuine impediments. Absent that, it is burning the very capital that got it pause. Israel is practicing a puncture and pause pattern, rapid strikes to punish what it calls violations, then a reversion to the ceasefire, while insisting that disarmament is the end state. The 29th of October operation was the deadliest night since the truce began on the 10th of October. The message is designed for 3 audiences: Hamas, Washington, and Netanyahu's right wing. The truce doesn't restrain the West Bank or Lebanon. Settler violence and raids in the northern West Bank continue to spike during the olive harvest. Lebanon saw fresh Israeli strikes and a fatal cross-border incident with Beirut ordering its army to confront further incursions. Each theatre offers an escalatory ladder, if Gaza phrase. London has announced the £4 million a commitment to for UNMAS to start clearing an estimated thousands of tons of unexploded ordnance, arguing that aid flow and any stabilization hinge on demining. That is a practical recognition that a ceasefire without access routes, safe corridors and UXO clearance is simply a pause inside a hazard zone. What this means for the next 72 hours, that the hinge is whether Hamas can return the remaining deceased or prove it tried and cannot. Every day without progress strengthens the Israeli case for limited reprisals under the truce rubric and weakens mediators pushing restraint. With centrists shunning Netanyahu and his base restive, he is incentivized to demonstrate resolve while staying just inside the lines Washington set. That is why we saw strike hard, then resume. As for Qatar, Egypt, Turkey and the US, they can keep stitching the truce only if both sides keep the core bargain. The ICRC episode made their task harder by eroding minimal trust around the central exchange. What would stabilize this fragile pause now would be a verified schedule for remains, a short, public monitored timetable for each of the 11 with allowances for sites that are physically inaccessible. That would lower the temperature and give families clarity. Third-party forensic evidence and recovery teams should be embedded as neutral verifiers. A reciprocal codicil on the West Bank restraint should be established. Without that clause, the dampened settler attacks and large-scale raids during harvest, each nightly incident invites retaliation chains that spill back into Gaza. UN OCHA data make clear the trend line, and the UK-backed demining push should be linked to specific crossing areas to particular targets and internal route openings agreed with Israel. Aid that cannot move will translate into pressure to break the truce. The ceasefire lives or dies on compliance with a simple exchange. Bodies for quiet for access. On the 29th to 30th of October, we saw both ends of that logic. Hamas returned 2 remains after an episode that shredded trust. Israel showed it will puncture the lull when it judges the bargain to be broken, then revert to it when mediators intervene. Netanyahu's politics pull him back to the settler right. The centre will not save him, and that very isolation is part of why he privileges force over process. And this is why it's important to read the text and watch the sequencing. Peace rhetoric is cheap. In this phase, the truce is sustained only by verifiable acts that mothers and fathers can establish. When that stops, the guns speak again. The parents need to establish the identity of their children. The relatives need to establish the identity of their loved ones who have been killed in the terrorist attack on October the 7th, and thereafter being held as hostages. That is the starting point. The problems lie in the settler movement, in the frustrations of the centrist groups in the Knesset, and in the antagonism of Hamas in Gaza. And caught in the middle of all this is the Palestinian population, horrifically terrorized by a siege from the IDF. And it's difficult to see how this can change without changing the person at the top, without changing Netanyahu.